היי ורדלה. ורדה לא זזה. וליאורה לא זזת, כולם מחייכים ולא זזים.
הנה, שלא תרגישי לבד.
נכון.
רוצה כוס תה? אני במטבח.
תודה, יש.
גם אצלך יש תה?
כתוב על זה קופי, אבל זה תה. היי שיר.
היי ליאורה.
רענן, הלאה.
גשם פה. ליאורה, גשם פה.
הלו, גשמה.
Hi Geshema, we can't hear you. It's very, there is almost no sound.
There's no sound. I've got this thing. Should I use this?
Okay, yeah. That'd be great.
Is that working better?
Yeah, much better.
Oh, good. Well, I've had it lying around the whole time. Good. So I can finally use it. This is what I use to translate when I translate for His Holiness. And it's working quite well. So, and I can hear you guys.
All right, great.
Well,
That's really good with the sound now.
Okay, good. All right, wonderful. We got, how much time do we have before we start? 2 minutes? Okay, good. All right, so this is a new password that you sent me, right?
Yes.
A new password?
Yes, and it will be used for all classes.
Okay, great. The ID is the same, isn't it? Isn't that the same ID?
Same link.
Okay, great. And this is a link that everyone uses?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Because people asked me for the link and I wasn't sure. I had a different one. Yeah, anyway, great. So I can just pass that on. Great. Okay. Did all of you listen to His Holiness teachings?
Yes.
Yes. Amazing. Wow. Incredible teachings. And the good thing is we'll discuss all this as part of this text. Everything His Holiness talked about is really what's in the entry into the middle way. So
yes, it was amazing today. Wow.
Yeah, so much. His Holiness talked so fast, unbelievable.
I think that by the end of the talk, maybe as an answer, he said that he daily or regularly read the text of Nagarjuna, our next course, the text of Pandrakirti, this book, and Deva's text, which we study on Wednesday with Anilosa.
And so the self-commentary. Pardon?
Maybe we're doing something good.
Yes, I think we do. And His Holiness always talks about the self-commentary. He also reads this. And of course, this text that he just taught. But the text His Holiness has taught, he taught only the passages, well, mostly the passages that are explained in Entry into the Middle Way. So it's all part of Lama Tsongkhapa's text.
There is also a beautiful explanation afterwards from a monk that mostly resides in Tushita, is now in Sarah.
Yes. Yes, I heard. Very good. Yes, he gave this review class. Exactly. Wonderful. Oh, sorry. There's some problem with the sound. I don't hear clearly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Glad to hear you, Varda.
All right. So can you hear me clearly? Is the sound still okay?
Great.
Okay. All right. So let me know when I should start.
Yeah. So we can start. Again, I pasted here in the chat the link for supporting the teacher and the activity of Dharma Friends of Israel. So So anyone who wants to support, thank you. And thank you, Geshe.
Here we can hardly hear you.
I'm saying I pasted in the chat box the link for donation for Dana. So you can use it to support the teacher and the activity of Dharma Friends of Israel. So thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Geshe, for teaching us.
Okay. All right. Well, let's start as usual. We start with a short meditation, a few minutes of breathing meditation to calm the mind, and then I'll lead you through generating the right motivation. And then to generate the proper motivation, as usual, visualize that the space in front of you is the Buddha, and surrounding the Buddha are the great Indian masters such as Nagarjuna, Ayadeva, Asanga, Chandrakirti, and so forth, all the Tibetan masters, your own personal teacher. Just think that you're in the presence of all these enlightened beings. And then likewise think that you're surrounded by all mother sentient beings. That they're silently sitting around you, experiencing the various types of sufferings. And then think that once again, we have the opportunity to learn about Chandrakirti's work. And so may that become a cause for us to remove the suffering, that is, help remove the suffering of sentient beings. And so may this become a cause for us to become fully enlightened, to be able to fulfill the aspiration of benefiting all sentient beings. So based on the wish that all sentient beings may be free from their sufferings, let's generate the wish to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings. And then motivated by bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, let's take refuge and generate once again bodhicitta and then recite the other prayers. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And then based on the aspiration to become enlightened, in order to now engage in the activities of a bodhisattva, we'll recite and meditate on the four immeasurable thoughts. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Okay, all right. Now we got to the end of the first chapter, and we'll start with the second chapter. And many of you have probably attended the teachings. And of course, His Holiness couldn't teach the entire text, the essence of true eloquence, as it's called in English. But he taught some of the most important passages, which of course are part of this text. So of course, as Holiness talked about it really quickly, it didn't spend much time, but especially today, those four consequences, they'll be very much, well, coming relatively soon in the sixth chapter, which is all in emptiness. They're explained there, and we can go back to Lama Tsongkhapa's text in order to get a better understanding of those consequences. Yeah, so it's not available. It's available in English. It's a little hard to understand, but we don't need to read it. I'll just go through it. And the last days, those teachings were just so amazing in the sense that His Holiness talked so fast and gave so much information in such short time. And of course, talking especially today also about bodhicitta, about the mind of enlightenment, and summarizing all of Buddha's teachings into those two aspects of bodhicitta and the mind of enlightenment. That really all our practice, and already before it, as part of one question asked by one of the monks, what is the main practice? If you only have 10 minutes of time every day, must have been a very busy monk. If you have only very short time, how can you practice most effectively? And His Holiness was very clear. Bringing into your life the understanding of emptiness, and we'll have plenty of time going into detail into this particular topic as part of the sixth chapter, which is the longest of the 10 chapters. That is actually 11 chapters of this text. And of course, the mind of enlightenment. His Holiness stressed it again and again, especially today. His Holiness talked a lot about it. And so reminding us again that this should also become part of our own practice. And what I would like you to do for the coming week as part of your other homeworks, if you like, of your other meditations, I would like you to continue definitely with generating the mind of enlightenment first thing in the morning. So when you sit down to practice as part of generating the motivation for the day, so you leave imprints basically on the mind. You leave something on your mind to remind you throughout the day. But what I would like you so far, I've already asked you to do, to try to generate bodhicitta, well, great compassion if you can, and then thereafter bodhicitta 20 times a day, which is up to you when you do it. Of course, when you feel calm, when you feel relaxed, it's relatively easy to then generate it. Comparing it to situations when you're stressed out, when you're unhappy. So this time I would like you to be very mindful throughout the week. When do you feel miserable? When are there times you feel frustrated, you feel stressed, you feel insulted, offended, etc.? So fearful, different reasons. You may have a good day, a relatively good day, but you'll find there will be moments when you don't feel totally relaxed and happy and peaceful. So at those days, to be very mindful of when you feel miserable, when you feel offended, when you feel stressed out, those moments, to become aware of them. And then as part of the experiment, I've talked about this as being like an experiment in the sense of checking whether bodhicitta really makes your mind calmer. As Susan has talked about it a lot, especially today, and has talked about it on numerous occasions, that great compassion, in particular, the mind of enlightenment that is based on great compassion, on the wish, may all sentient beings be free from suffering. May I myself be able to contribute to the removal of suffering of sentient beings. So based on that motivation, then to generate the mind of enlightenment. And now, this time, to be very mindful of your misery, of moments when you're unhappy, and generate bodhicitta, generate the mind of enlightenment to see, can you actually remove those moments when you feel dissatisfied, whatever it is. I mean, I'm not talking about, I mean, if you can, of course, if there's huge suffering, if you're really miserable and depressed, etc., those times too, but that might be a little difficult. But still, there's no reason why you shouldn't try to generate bodhicitta. But also, if they're just tiny moments when you notice you don't feel good, you're obsessed with something, you're unhappy, dissatisfied, frustrated, etc. So in those moments, to remember, to try and remember, what is it I'm trying to experiment with here? Well, bodhicitta. And instead of focusing, because that's what we usually do, Holmes talked a lot about the self-centered attitude. Holmes actually said half of all our suffering is from self-grasping, half of our suffering comes from the self-centered attitude. Of course, although this misperception of reality, our misapprehension of reality, although that's the root cause, but still directly, it's both of them directly cause our suffering, self-centeredness, as well as the misapprehension of reality. And so therefore, our self-centered attitude, that's very much active in that moment when we are miserable. There's no other way. So if you then generate bodhicitta, that is the wish to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings. So don't forget that part. That's most important, to do it for the welfare of others. Your attention is now focused on others. And please try to do this experiment as part, as I mentioned, this experiment. Does it really help my mind? Does it make me feel calmer? Does it take care of this problem in that moment? Because that's the only way. If we feel this is really effective, initially our practice will not be done for the benefit of sentient beings. Of course not. We're habituated to working for our own benefit, but this is a way to find that bodhicitta, great compassion, etc., those actually, even though they're right now not the real deal, when, I mean, some of you may have actual bodhicitta. As Holmes said it today, there are many bodhisattvas in this world. So there may be quite a number of you who are bodhisattvas, hard to say. But in the end, it's all about emulating this mind of enlightenment, like a bodhisattva, emulating the bodhisattvas, generating this mind. And it's basically fake it until you make it. So please try for this week, in particular, to check your mental state, and when you feel miserable, make an effort to generate bodhicitta. So that's one part I'd like you to do for this week. But then, of course, what we're also doing as part of this lesson, we'll start talking about the second chapter, the second ground, as it's also called, which is the stainless ground. We've talked already about the first ground, giving, to practice the perfection of giving. Again, of course, we're not, well, let's assume we're beginners, we're not bodhisattvas, and so we're not on that level. But nonetheless, to train our mind, to leave imprints in our mind, to generate, make new pathways in our mind, let's go through the notion of behaving like a bodhisattva. So last week, what I asked you to do was to practice generosity. And to stress this again, to practice generosity, of course, doesn't just mean to give material objects, to give material things. It also includes giving the Dharma, that is, living the Dharma, being an example of the Dharma. And of course, to give your time in the sense of giving fearlessness, as is usually described, that is to help other sentient beings, especially in times of suffering, in times of sadness, etc., to give your time to sentient beings. And in terms of material things, I think it's also important here to, of course, have wisdom, understanding that you can only give that much. And it's not about the amount you give, it's about having this openness of heart to give. And even if it's just of a little amount, even if it's just a beggar when you walk past someone begging in the street, to give a little bit, maybe a little bit more than usual, but of course only as much as you can afford. So that's important. And it's generosity is not the actual physical giving, it's the state of mind. It's described as a mental factor that wants to give. So this is true generosity, this mind that just wants to give, that wants to give to others, whether it is material objects, whether it is time, whether it is the Dharma, in terms of being, of course, mainly an example of someone who lives the Dharma. So that is this kind of openness, this open mind. And this should still be part of your practice. So despite this other, well, what I talked about a few minutes ago, so about generating bodhicitta as often as you can, but also generating giving, that is when the opportunity arises to give. But then secondly, the next perfection that we'll talk about is the perfection of ethical conduct or ethical discipline, as it's called in this text here. So ethical discipline as in refraining from harmful actions, actions that harm ourselves and actions that harm others. Now, this is slightly different. The practice of ethical discipline is slightly different to the practice of generosity, although generosity should always be there, of course, but the actual giving, the wish to give something, and then of course to physically also give it or verbally give I don't know, advice, etc. So here, in the case of ethical conduct, it's about restraining the mind. It's described as a mental factor of determination, a virtuous type of determination to not engage in actions that are harmful, actions of the body, physical actions, actions of the speech, or actions of the mind that are harmful to others. And in that way, of course, harmful to ourselves or harmful to ourselves and others. Okay, so that's what ethical conduct is all about. But of course, here, ethical conduct is not just that. It is ethical conduct connected with bodhicitta, with the mind of enlightenment. So to become a perfection of ethical conduct as part of the 6 perfections. So each chapter, the first chapter dealt with the perfection of generosity. Each chapter deals with one of the perfections. And now for the second chapter, it's the perfection of ethical conduct, which is conjoined with bodhicitta. So you're already emulating that is engaging in that practice if you've generated bodhicitta all throughout the day. Okay, start your day with bodhicitta and continue. And when I said earlier, generate bodhicitta when you're miserable, I'm not saying don't generate bodhicitta at other times, but this is an extra kind of task, if you like, an extra type of practice I'd like you to do in those times when you're miserable, to see, to generate it, to check whether it actually helps you to deal with the problem. But besides that, even if you've got a perfectly nice, peaceful day, well, to still generate the mind of enlightenment. And if then you also engage in ethical behavior or in ethical conduct, then you're practicing the second perfection of ethical conduct. Of course, there's more to it, because since we're talking about the level of an Arya being, there's also the direct realization of emptiness that is part of this particular level of practice. And again, we will also be reminded of this as part of the practice of ethical conduct. Emptiness is also part of that. So it comes into it, and it'll be explained actually pretty much at the beginning of this text. All right. So if we start with the first verse, I did mention another verse that I didn't explain last time. As you may remember, I gave you like a short summary of what we've done before. I won't do that today. I'll do it again after 2 or 3 classes, again, to just give you a short summary, to not forget what we went through before. I forgot to mention one verse last time. I noticed towards the end, and I pointed that out, and I'll mention it. I'll mention it as part of the second chapter. This one verse, it'll fit in quite nicely. So anyway, here, the second chapter is also the second, it deals with the second ground, or the second bhumi of a bodhisattva, which is called the stainless. Remember, the first ground was called the joyful one, the greatly joyful one. Why? Because you experience on that level, as a bodhisattva, realizing emptiness directly for the first time, you experience great joy. Partly because of the direct realization of emptiness, but partly also because the main practice on that level is the practice of giving. Okay, it's surpassing of all the different perfections. You reach the surpassing level of giving. And what is the criterion for reaching that level? Well, being able to give without the slightest sense of regret, the slightest sense of attachment towards the objects you give. So on that level, on that first level, once you realize emptiness directly, this is on that first level, on that first bhumi, your practice of giving is described to be surpassing. But now on the second level, what is your surpassing? What is the special, which special perfection do you engage in? What is, how does it become a surpassing level? So you're not falling down from your ability to give. You're still on that same level of giving. But now on the first level, your ethical conduct was not surpassing. It was not, what's the word that Jeffrey Hopkins, Thupten Jinpa uses, like preeminent. I think he uses that word, surpassing or preeminent. No, on the second level now, it's your, besides giving, it's also ethical conduct that's surpassing, that's preeminent, whichever term you want to use, that is superior. What does that mean? Well, first it says in verse 1, it says he is endowed. I don't like so much he uses, I'd like him to actually use plural, because it would just work. I mean, you can say he, but you could say she as well. Plural is quite nice. So they are endowed with perfect morality and purity, even in dreams. They shun the stain of immorality. So saying that bodhisattvas, or the bodhisattva, is endowed with perfect morality and purity, even in dreams. All right, so in dreams, this is where, and it's explained in the following verses, but why, what's so special about ethical conduct on that level? That ethical conduct is practiced at all times. So what did I say was the definition of ethical conduct, or the meaning of ethical conduct? It's a virtuous determination that refrains from non-virtuous actions. And in that sense, well, how does it make it surpassing that even in your dreams, or you as bodhisattvas, if you're a bodhisattva, if you're on that level, even in your dreams, you will refrain from engaging in any immoral, in any harmful behaviors, even in your dreams. Now, dreams are quite interesting because you've definitely noticed in your daily life, well, you engage, you act in a certain way throughout your day, and then at nighttime you sometimes have dreams where you do crazy things. So crazy doesn't necessarily mean immoral, doesn't necessarily mean non-virtues, but definitely there are times, and you may even have very virtuous dreams, but there are definitely also sometimes dreams where you do things that you would not do during your waking state. And so again, here as part of the practice of a bodhisattva on the second level, the second bhumi, as it's called, and we haven't really talked about what happens to your understanding of emptiness, etc. That comes later. But on that level, as you now, in terms of wisdom and method, Sonda spoke about it today as the two wings of practice. So method here includes this perfection of ethical discipline. Wisdom, it's a different matter. We'll talk more about this as part of the 6th chapter, but as part of the 2nd chapter, the focus is on the method aspect. In that, your ethical conduct, which is this method aspect that's superior in that case, you don't even have any dreams that are non-virtuous. So it's reached that level of your mind, that subtle level of your mind. Again, it's almost talked a lot, especially yesterday, about the subtle level of your mind, the different levels, that there's of course a mind, subtler minds. So we have, well, little control over our coarse mind, but even less control over our subtle mind. And subtle mind can mean many different things. Thomas referred to the tantric path, where you have a coarse, subtle, and very subtle mind. But when we say the subtle mind, the middling kind of subtle mind, that usually refers to minds at the time of sleep, when you're dreaming, and so forth, when you're faint. But even within the waking mind, the mind when you're awake, even there are so many different levels of coarseness and subtlety. So in modern psychology, when you have terms such as subconscious, unconscious, I sometimes wonder, well, those don't come up so much in Buddhism. They don't use words such as subconscious, but subtler mind, definitely. And what Holness said today, and it's so important, when he talked about today, he said, when you practice the Dharma, it's important that you bring it to an emotional level. He used the word for feeling on the level of feeling. Sometimes His Holiness uses the word emotion, but he didn't today. He didn't use the English word, because there is a word in Tibetan, but it's actually more a new term that's newly being coined, tsonyong, or well, emotion. He used the word for feeling actually, but actually from what he said, it was on an emotional level, on a level of emotions. So to bring your practice to not let it be leave it on the coarsest level, but to bring it to a subtler level. And that is so important. It's because on the coarse level, it's very rational, it's intellectual. So yeah, it makes sense to have bodhicitta, and you may actually generate this mind of bodhicitta, like it's not spontaneous in any way, but you generate it, you bring it to that level. But then to bring it onto a more emotional level, that's when your practice becomes really effective. It should move you. It should move you on that level. And Ms. Holness has said it today, and my teachers, they always stress this. Geshe Thupten Pesang as one person who always talks about bringing it onto an emotional level. So there are these emotions such as feeling inspired, of being touched. It's really hard to put them into words, because so these emotions are so hard to understand in the first place, but then to put them into words and delineate between the different emotions is difficult anyway. But I guess we can all get that part of where it goes onto a deeper level. So your practice is part of not just the intellectual level, but the practice of here ethical conduct conjoined, of course, with bodhicitta. Otherwise, it would not be the perfection of ethical discipline. So conjoined, not separate from bodhicitta. That's what we're trying to accomplish here. And you're trying to do this, well, as much as possible to bring it also onto a more emotional level, which would be a subtler level of your mind while you're awake. And here the Bodhisattva on that level has brought the practice of morality to an even subtler level, even during their dreams. So even during their dreams, they refrain from ethical conduct, from unethical, unethical, that is non-virtuous behavior. Okay. And we'll learn more about this. There'll be more explanation. It's even more than that. But anyway, that's what it says here, the first 2 lines. Lama Tsongkhapa, in his text clarifying the intent, you have the text that was made available to you. It's just a draft by Thubten Jinpa, but I'm pretty sure it won't change that much. It just needs a little bit of editing. So it's going to be, I think, it will be published this year or maybe next year. Anyway, so right now there's only the draft available, but he translated of course, as part of the whole translation, also the outlines or the headings of all the outlines. So on this ground, it says initially, the ethical discipline is completely purified. That's the first outline. And then that has subdivisions. And the first kind of division, or the first outline, that describes the first 2 lines of the first verse. So verse number 1, I just read those 2 lines. They are part of this outline, this section that is described as how ethical discipline is perfected on this ground. How do you engage in the perfection of ethical discipline? And as I just said, you refrain from immoral, that is non-virtuous conduct, even during your dreams. Okay, so even during that level, bodhisattvas shun or refrain from the stain of immorality by way of restraining their minds. Okay, so here Lama Tsongkhapa in his commentary, mentioning that, he also mentions 2 types of ethical discipline. You may have heard of them. I'm not talking about the 2 types in terms of understanding of emptiness and not understanding of emptiness, which will come in verse 3 or 4, it's described. But here it talks about, as Thubten Jinpa calls it, the natural reprehensible deeds. So refraining from naturally non-virtuous actions and refraining from violating prescribed rules. So naturally reprehensible or naturally non-virtuous actions, to refrain from those. So what are naturally negative actions? Well, the act of killing, the act of stealing, the act of sexual misconduct. Here you have the list of 10 non-virtues. So to refrain from the 10 non-virtues. You're all familiar with those, I guess, I suppose. So you have the 3 of the body: killing, stealing, sexual misconduct. Then the 4 of the speech: insulting speech, divisive speech, lying, and senseless speech. And then the last 3, covetousness or strong kind of greed, harmful intent, and wrong view. Now, when it comes to those killing, stealing, sexual, it's not talking about sexual conduct in general, but just misconduct, any kind of sexual behavior that causes pain, they're said to be naturally negative. So even in the case of killing, you may have heard, I've talked about this on several occasions, but sometimes people ask, well, can killing not be positive? Can that not be virtuous? And the answer is, it can be made virtuous. It can be the act of killing can be so virtuous that it can be conducted in a way that it is partly virtuous, but there will always be an aspect of non-virtue. So this is in the case of euthanasia. That would be probably a good example, which is done out of pure motivation. The person is terribly suffering, etc. So let's assume it's actually in terms of the Dharma, we for some reason know this is the best course of action. The person will not get better, it'll just get worse, and they'll be very aggressive, etc. So whatever, just a perfect kind of scenario where you could say, all right, it's admissible the person has the wish to die. They don't have much life, not much life left, basically, because they're terminally ill. In that case, euthanasia, if you assist someone dying, is that non-virtuous? And the answer is yes. What is it? The wish for that person to be better, etc. Is that non-virtuous? Not at all. So the aspect, what is the part that is virtuous? Well, you do it for the benefit of that person. You want to benefit them. You want to relieve them from suffering. That's all part of the plan. That's all part of planning the act of euthanasia. So that part is positive. What makes it non-virtuous is the wish to kill, is the wish to take someone's life. That wish, it has to be there. You can't take someone's life without that intention. Well, you can, but then it doesn't become an act of killing. So it's only that thought, because it has to be part of it. If you engage in euthanasia, there's many different thoughts you need to have as part of the planning. And so therefore, that wish to kill, that is non-virtuous. But it doesn't mean the whole package is not virtuous in many other ways. So it's just that it's more complicated than, or it's not black and white. There's a lot of gray in between where there's virtue and non-virtue, basically as part of that whole package. So in that way, also stealing, it's the intent to take something that is not yours. But here, I think killing is a special case, since life is precious and so forth. Stealing still needs to, you need to have the motivation, it needs to be driven by self-cherishing, needs to be driven by attachment. Also in the case of, I don't need to go through all of them, but lying, for instance. I mean, we've just talked about Lama Tsongkhapa's text. His Holiness just went through his Lama Tsongkhapa's text, where he differentiates between interpretative teachings and definitive teachings. I don't know whether the English translator used the same vocabulary, but basically teachings that you can take literally and teachings that you can't take literally, to use a different way of describing them. So in that case, interpretative, definitive teachings, well, you could say, well, did the Buddha lie when he gave interpretative teachings? Was he not telling the truth? Well, no, he wasn't presenting the final view, but it's not considered to be lying. So the intention was not an intention of deceiving someone, but rather to benefit. So as in English, they're called white lies, for instance, depending on how you define them, but with the intention of benefiting another person. That is not part of those 10 non-virtues. Okay, so we don't need to go through all of those. You can read about them in the Lamrim text. And for instance, the Lamrim Chenmo, the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment by Lama Tsongkhapa, and in other texts. But the point is here, you refrain from those, and those actions, those 10 non-virtues are naturally non-virtuous actions, but they're also prescribed rules. So as an example, sexual conduct in itself is not considered to be a non-virtuous action, only if it harms others. So in itself is not considered to be an non-virtuous action. But if you've taken a vow of celibacy and then you act, you have sexual conduct, you engage in sexual conduct, well, then that's a violation of a prescribed rules, or it's prescribed rule, because you gave a vow, you gave a promise, and now you're breaking that promise, and there's non-virtue in that. So in that sense, breaking a vow that you've taken, that is the act actually that is breaking the vow is not naturally negative, but since you've taken the vow for the benefit of sentient beings, because you personally, it helps you personally in certain situations, well, breaking that vow would be a violation of prescribed rules. And again, what's important is that you've broken it. It's not like you've given given back the vow. That's different. If you give back a vow, you decide I cannot keep it, and you give it back, that's a different situation. You're not breaking it. You're not violating this rule, but instead you break it. You're just out of desire, out of anger, whatever the motivation, you break the vow. And that would be this kind of violation. All right. So then Lama Tsongkhapa speaks about what is the word ethical conduct? What does it mean? In Sanskrit, it means shila. Shila has the connotation, shila refers to coolness, and lati, those two words, sita or shita, I guess you can pronounce it. And then lati, shita means coolness, shila means coolness, and the word lati means to attain. So to attain coolness. Coolness in the sense of the heat of regret, having engaged in negative actions, it cools down the regret, it cools down, well, whatever negative emotion is part of that process. And in Tibetan, the word doesn't translate that way. It actually, in Tibetan, the word means ethical conduct or ethical discipline, ethical rule, ethical discipline, ethical conduct. So therefore, the motivating factor, of course, is most important. Based on that, to not engage in harmful actions, well, that's considered to be shila or ethical conduct. And the 10 non-virtuous actions, they, of course, they're just examples. They're the main kind of actions. But especially this day and age, I mean, senseless, for instance, senseless talk. Senseless talk doesn't mean to be with a friend and just chatter, etc., just relaxed and in a relaxed fashion. It's again motivated by attachment, to gossip about another person, and makes you feel really good that the other person is being gossiped about, etc. So out of anger, out of any kind of motivation to engage in senseless talk. But nowadays we have like senseless chatter, like online, if you just chat with someone for hours. So that's not speech. It's none of the, it's an action of the body actually more. Of course, the mental aspect is there, but it's typing in that sense. And so the words that you type, they're not words in the sense that they're sound, so it's not verbal. Stealing has new aspects, like you can download it online. You don't pay for it. You go to certain websites and you can download it for free. But since you're actually breaking the law of the country you're in, you're actually stealing. So there are new ways in which, well, in terms of the 21st century, the kind of behavior we engage in, there are new challenges. All right. Anyway, that part is describing, this is very extensive. Lama Tsongkhapa gives an extensive explanation when it comes to ethical conduct. And then in the next 2 lines, he says, since all movements of the Bodhisattva's body, speech, and mind are pure, the Bodhisattva accumulates the excellent virtue of all 10 courses of action. So how on this basis, on the basis of the previous 2 lines, the qualities become completely purified. As I said, in the same way as described before, they're pure now, pure actions of body, speech, and mind. Why? Because not even in a dream there is the thought of, or there's any negative kind of conduct. So the Bodhisattva therefore accumulates the excellent virtue of all 10 courses of action, so refraining from the 10 non-virtues. And how ethical conduct becomes superior compared to the first ground? Well, not only this, that's the next aspect, according to Lama Tsongkhapa's outlines or the headings of the outlines, how ethical discipline becomes superior compared to the discipline on the first ground, on the first bhumi. Well, then Chandrakirti says, not only this path of virtue, but in all deeds, the Bodhisattva, he becomes most excellent and pure. Just as the radiant autumn moon adorns the night sky, morality adorns him with peace and radiance. Again, the example of the moon that was used before. Not only this path of virtue, but in all 10 actions and all other actions, the actions become most excellent and pure. So the example of the moon being used, the analogy of the moon as before, but used in a different way. In the previous chapter it was used, but slightly differently. A lot of the time, the moon is a huge part of this text. And no surprise, Chandrakirti, Chandra means moon actually, is part of his name. So Takpa kind of means the renowned ones. So Chandrakirti in Tibetan means Dawa Takpa. Dawa means moon, and Takpa means kind of renowned. So the renowned moon, if you like. And here, yeah, the example again and again being the moon. So radiant moon, first of all, it's an adornment. It's something like an ornament, and it gives peace and radiance. So radiance is also extremely important, that there is something about the charisma of a person, the radiance of a person. So the different words use, the energy of a person, whatever you want to call it. For a bodhisattva, it's actually extremely important to be attractive not in a sexual attractive way, not at all, but to have a certain charisma, to be appealing in your speech, in your external appearance, but also in terms of your explanations, your way of talking, because of course your goal is to guide sentient beings, to lead them towards enlightenment, liberation and enlightenment. And you can only do so if people listen to you. And ethical conduct, it gives people this radiance. And it's a lot about honesty. It's a lot about honesty. So honesty, and honesty, not just refraining from lying, but to not pretend to be this person and that person, which is kind of part of lying, if you like. But it has that aspect of being totally yourself, to not pretend, to not be pretentious, to be yourself, to be honest about your faults and about your qualities. And in that sense, of course, to refrain from lying, refrain from the other 9 non-virtues. And that gives the person, and I'm sure scientifically, I mean, there was this question on the fast day, someone asked whether you could prove this scientifically. Can you prove emptiness? Can you prove that the meditation on emptiness actually eliminates the afflictive emotions? And His Holiness's response was, well, scientists have no interest in this, haven't shown any interest in this so far, but it could theoretically, it could be proven. So the same is true for this here. I mean, if scientists pay more attention, on this mentioned, they pay more attention to the mind, the working of consciousness, the non-physical mind, more attention to love and compassion, how they benefit, how they bring peace of mind. Scientists have paid more attention to these aspects. And His Holiness was hopeful also about, well, other aspects will possibly become part of the experiment. But I believe you can prove all of this. It's just scientists haven't done so yet. I mean, 300 years from now, if people look back and on what scientists knew in the 21st century, they'll laugh about it. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. This is a tendency I notice again and again now, spending a lot of time, of course, in the West, where there is this notion scientists, they know everything. The scientists haven't proven that it works, so therefore it doesn't work. Kind of this kind of idea. But then when you ask these people, look back 200 years ago, did scientists know everything? They just laugh. No, of course they didn't. No, there's so much they didn't know yet. There's so little. But and then that usually my thought is, and sometimes I say so. So if you now, like 200 years from now, how much more do they know from then on? I mean, from now onwards, and there's so much they don't know yet. So the sense that, of course, there's a lot of knowledge, but everything in terms of here, these aspects that I explained here, I'm very sure that there's scientific measures or scientific means to prove these, but you first need to have the interest to do so. So it's so simple, and again, it's part of the experiments, of course. Which takes some time. If you engage in ethical conduct, does it actually change you externally? But it makes sense in terms of chemicals. If we engage in non-virtuous actions, that means afflictive emotions arise. They create certain chemicals. I mean, there's been some research on anger, how it leads to high blood pressure, how it leads to certain chemicals in the body, etc. And as I said, these non-virtuous actions are motivated by these emotions that create chemicals in the body. And these chemicals, they affect our skin, they affect our smell, they affect all these aspects. So it makes perfect sense that through time, if you generate more virtuous states of mind, that there are chemicals, certain chemicals released in the body that will have an effect on your external appearance, etc. So here it's said that your external experience is very much that you develop a certain radiance which for yourself, of course, is pleasant, but it's also important to work for the benefit of others. Therefore, it says here, not only this path of virtue, but in all 10 deeds, etc. So like the radiant autumn moon, you become adorned with peace and radiance. It gives you peace of mind and radiance. Okay, so radiance is the external part. Peace of mind, of course, and you've had, again, there's so many examples of His Holiness teaching about this the last 3 days when His Holiness talked about the 3 trainings, for instance. I think it was on the first day, mentioning the 3 trainings where you have ethical conduct as the basis, which calms the mind to such a degree that you can then more effectively practice shamatha, more effectively engage in the practice of one-pointed meditation. And therefore, without proper ethical conduct, you can meditate on shamatha as much as you want. The mind will not have sufficient peace. There will not be a sufficient peace of mind, not sufficient calmness to then be able to focus single-pointedly on one object. Therefore, we like sometimes in the West, we really like single-pointed meditation. In fact, I think sometimes we grow a little attached to it. But I think it's initially, it's most important to pay attention to our ethical conduct. And as we hear soon, this will be explained as part of what Lama Tsongkhapa says, ethical conduct is not just refraining from non-virtuous actions. So it's not just about omission, it's also about commission, as Thupten Jinpa calls it. So it's not just, and he puts this really nice footnote in there where he says, like, if you compare it to like, you shall not, thou shall not, thou shall. So ethical conduct does not just refer to what you should refrain from, what you should restrain your mind from, but it's also engaging in certain other actions. So, for instance, to generate bodhicitta. You refrain, of course, automatically. You have to refrain from the self-cherishing attitude to effectively generate, even if it's just fake, even if it's just contrived bodhicitta. Of course, initially that's all we generate, but that's still important. As it says in the very first verse of this text, it talks about the 3 aspects, the 3 causes of a bodhisattva, and one of them is this fake bodhicitta, this contrived, this non-spontaneous bodhicitta. So if we generate bodhicitta, in our case, that is the aspiration to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. It's never real bodhicitta initially, unless we're already bodhisattvas. No, it's this contrived version. But without it, no way can we actually generate spontaneous bodhicitta. So that is part of ethical conduct. It's part of ethical conduct, a certain degree of renunciation. This is part of not just refraining from something, but also certain virtues, states of mind, which will be explained, or Lama Tsongkhapa explained them in his commentary. All right, but having said all that, then the next verse, oh yeah, it's already verse number 3. Here talks about other conditions. So what is the condition that purifies ethical discipline, as mentioned in verse number 1 and number 2, making it superior to the previous practice of ethical conduct? Well, it's refraining from non-virtue, even on a subtler level of mind, on the level of the middling subtle level of mind, which means very important. I mentioned earlier that there are 3 levels of subtlety. Okay, 3 levels of coarseness and subtlety in Buddhism. Those are explained in the tantric texts. Number 1 is the coarse waking mind. Number 2 is during the dream state, when you're dreaming. And number 3, the subtlest level, is during the clear light mind. Of course, they're in between levels, but on a very coarse level, very coarsely spoken, very generally explained, you can talk about these 3 levels. Now, a bodhisattva on that level, on the middling level, the second level of subtlety during the dream. So of course is during the waking state, the middling subtle is during the dream state, and the subtlest is during the clear light level, during the time of death, for instance. The clear light mind is the subtlest level of mind possible. So during the second level here, it's said that the bodhisattva doesn't have any non-virtuous thoughts. That means there are no non-virtuous thoughts during the waking state. But why does it not mention that very subtlest level of the clear light mind? Well, because there is no non-virtue on the subtlest level. Like you cannot have a non-virtuous thought. So on that level, it's not even possible. Then there are other levels between the dream state and the very subtle death mind, the very subtle clear light mind. As Holness talked about these different levels of absorption, white appearance, red increasement, and so forth. Can you have non-virtuous thoughts then? I don't think so. I don't believe so. And I seem to remember even then, no, there's not much control over those, and I don't think you have non-virtuous thoughts then. Doesn't mean if you have control that you must have non-virtuous thoughts or the other way around. But the point is, I don't think so. So basically, there are no non-virtuous thoughts, I guess, on that level. Not even in their dreams. So they have no longer engaged in any of the non-virtues. But is that action totally pure? Well, there's one more level of purity, if you like, of well, yeah, cleanness or purity. This word pure is very much used in Buddhism again and again. Pure in relation to this, that, and the other. Here, pure as in like considering negative actions to be impure, to call them contaminated or dirty in the sense that they cause us to suffer. They cause us suffering from that perspective. All right, but there's another condition. So to make your practice of morality, make that pure, is of course, and that was the same as before with regard to generosity. Remember generosity, we talked about generosity that is connected to an understanding of emptiness. So to make your practice of generosity more effective, and that's what I ask you as part of your practice, ask you to focus on when you engage in giving, to not just give the object with the mind of bodhicitta, but to also remember the person who gives doesn't exist inherently. The person you give to doesn't exist inherently. And the object you give doesn't exist inherently. And part of that is also the action of giving. Even that is just labeled. It doesn't exist in and of itself. So the same you're trying to do now on the next level, you do the same. Remember, when you refrain, that is when you restrain yourself from engaging in a non-virtuous action. Say, let's take an example. There's I don't know, a fly or something or an insect. There's a mosquito in your room, and instead of squashing it, you get like a little device. I actually got one here, but I can't reach it right now. Like one of those devices that you put on the insect. There's like a little thing, like a latch or something, and you kind of close it and you take the insect outside. You can actually buy them online and stuff. I don't know whether you can get those in Israel, but you can use a glass as well. So this would be if you take an insect out of your room without killing it, a mosquito or whatever else. So to bring it outside, that's the act of giving. You give, you protect this insect from being killed, but it's also, of course, the ethical conduct of refraining from killing. So in that moment, if you engage in that action, as part of this second bhumi here, to engage in that action, to remember you yourself don't exist inherently. The mosquito doesn't exist inherently. It's merely labeled on the basis of certain body parts and on the basis of a mind, a different mind to a human, but nonetheless, they're still sentient. And so based on that, and of course, the act of refraining from killing, that's also just labeled on the basis of certain actions, moments in time of protecting this animal. Therefore, you engage in the action of the ethical conduct of refraining from killing, but based on the understanding that neither the object nor yourself nor the action, none of those exist inherently. And if you do this, then you engage in the purest form of ethical conduct. So it says here, should he, the bodhisattva, though pure in terms of the subtler level of his or her mind, not being affected by negative thoughts, by non-virtuous actions, but see in terms of intrinsic nature, perceiving still the giver, the object, etc., as intrinsically existent or inherently existent, independently existent, the morality of this bodhisattva will remain impure, impure with respect to a misapprehension of reality. Thus, with respect to all three elements, the three spheres or the three elements here, the person practicing, the object of practice, and that which is practiced. Okay, so the person or the being that you, with regard to whom you engage in ethical conduct, you yourself, and what you refrain from. All these three lack inherent existence. So it's not pure in the sense, again, why pure and impure? What does that mean, pure and impure? Here, pure means an action or a phenomenon that does not cause you to suffer, whereas impure causes suffering. In the sense that if you engage in ethical conduct, in what sense does it cause suffering? Well, it doesn't cause suffering, but your act of ethical conduct is still part of samsara, in that you perceive yourself as the person engaging in moral conduct as inherently existent, etc. So you're basically, based on that, it does not become an antidote to your misapprehension. While if you consider these aspects of lack of inherent existence of the person engaging in ethical conduct and so forth, you're actually, it does not just become the act of ethical conduct and does not just become an antidote to non-virtuous behavior, but it also becomes an antidote to the misapprehension of reality. And therefore, it becomes an antidote to samsara. Great. Okay. And this is why it's so important. That's one of the reasons it's so important when you engage in virtuous actions to also remember emptiness. To remember when you do this action, I don't exist inherently, the object doesn't, etc. Now, this will seem very difficult initially. It is. Why? And that's what Hans talked about the whole time. We're not familiar with it. We're just not used to it. We need to get used to this. It's all about that. We got used to being angry. We got used to we create new habits. Our whole life has been about creating different habits. Now we're doing the same, but creating habits that are part of Buddhist psychology. In this case, creating the habit of when you engage in a certain action, virtuous action in particular, remember the act is not inherently, it doesn't exist independently. It's merely labeled. The person engaging in the action is merely labeled, and so forth. Okay, so in that way, it becomes not just a cause, it's not just a virtuous karma, but it's also a cause of relieving yourself from samsara. Actually, there's this argument, well, but if it's done with a motivation to become enlightened, doesn't it become a cause of enlightenment? And actually it does. It does become a cause. But the more you can remember in that moment the fact that the object doesn't exist inherently and so forth, the more it becomes, of course, it takes you even further towards removing ignorance. Okay, now how do you go about this? How does an act of refraining from killing, how is that doesn't exist inherently? I seem to be, early on I said, well, the thought to kill, I even well, I didn't use that word, but I implied that it's natural to that thought to be negative. Remember, it's natural to that. So killing, just the thought of killing is said to be non-virtuous, even if it's done in connection with euthanasia, which there's very positive thoughts that are part of that part of this whole package. Of course, the act of killing is actually, the act of killing is labeled on the basis of a whole chain of thoughts. Okay, there's a whole chain of thoughts. There's a whole package of different thoughts. The wish to kill, the motivation to benefit this person in that moment, and so forth. Euthanasia in this case. So I said one part is this negative part, but here saying naturally it has that negative aspect to it, that doesn't mean intrinsic. So what I'm trying to say here is that what is this act of refraining from killing, as an example, or killing itself? If you take killing, it's merely labeled on a whole chain of thoughts, of actions of body, speech, and mind, which includes certain thoughts, motivation, etc. And then the act of killing, the actual killing. And based on that, we label killing. Just label killing. So in and of itself, there is no killing. There are just all these moments that on the basis of all these moments, we then label killing. Okay, so you can't find the killing within the killing. It's just based on these moments that perform a certain function that we then label in relation to many things that are other than killing. So killing exists only in dependence on things that are not killing. None of those moments are killing, but you couldn't have killing without these moments. So we're saying it doesn't exist in and of itself because that would mean that you don't need anything else for it to become killing. You don't need to call it that. You don't need to label on the basis of all these moments. However, if you didn't have to do that, you couldn't have any killing. It'd be permanent. It'd be unchanging. It could not interact with anything. You couldn't kill because you couldn't. The action of killing could not happen in interaction with other factors. So that shows it doesn't exist in and of itself. And the same is true for refraining from killing, which is the ethical conduct of the virtue of refraining from killing, part of this ethical conduct. It's again, and it's a chain in time to different moments, different thoughts that are involved. The fact that you refrain physically from killing someone, motivated by certain thoughts, all that is part of refraining from killing. So that's the name you give to this on the basis of these moments. Again, it doesn't exist intrinsically. And you, the person refraining, of course, there's no intrinsic refrainer from killing, as if you could, Sonis used the word again and again, you could point at this. This is the refraining from killing. This is this part. No, it's merely labeled on the basis of body and mind. And of course, also the other person, whoever, with regard to whom, I mean, I guess with regard to all sentient beings, we're refraining from killing. When you refrain from killing, you do so with regard to all sentient beings because you're not killing a single sentient being. But none of those sentient beings exist in and of themselves. All right. So in that sense, when you refrain yourself, and again, it's important to have that thought. You only engage in ethical conduct if you have the motivation not to kill. Because otherwise trees and mountains would engage in the virtue of not killing, well, because they don't kill. Well, no, not intentionally, definitely. I mean, they do cause death, possibly, trees when they fall over, etc. But the point is, they don't refrain because there's no intention to do so. But if you are in a situation where you could possibly, like, kill an insect, for instance, and you refrain from yourself from doing so, well, in that moment, you refrain yourself, and then killing, stealing, etc. Okay. So, but very important to have the third aspect to present, have that third aspect, to have that aspect of the three elements or the three spheres of understanding the person engaging in the action, the object, and the action itself, plus in this case what you refrain from, that they lack inherent existence. Okay, now this is as far as I want to go for today. Before we start the meditation, now just to kind of bring it all together again, for you to, of course, practice. Like, this is the part of this big experiment. And I just want to stress it over and over again. Like I said, continue with your practice of bodhicitta. Make sure you generate the mind of enlightenment again and again, especially when you have a hard time. But secondly, Also engage, be generous when the opportunity presents itself. Engage in that action if you can. And thirdly, as part of this week's practice, engage in ethical discipline. That is, refrain from killing, stealing. That's easier. Well, stealing is a little harder in terms of online dealing. For instance, yeah, stealing is a little harder in terms of online dealings. Are we doing something that's illegal or not? Then, of course, also speech. Okay, are we insulting someone, etc.? And mental aspects, covetousness, excessive greed, if you like, plus harmful thoughts. So all these are part of the ethical conduct. So the three of non-virtue, in particular, harmful intents, harmful thoughts, plus, well, craving as in covetousness, refraining from those, that's all part of refraining from unethical conduct. So we've got a few moments now for questions before we'll do the meditation.
Can I ask something?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, concerning His Holiness teaching this morning, he was asked by someone about the experiments people do on animals. I had some problem with the answer. I didn't really understood his approach, because he said, if I understood well, he said that if the motivation is helping people, it's helping human being, it's okay. Like if you can see. So I didn't understand why we as people are more important. And he didn't speak about precious human birth, where we are because we are practitioners, so it's important for us to be healthy and to use animals to our health. I didn't understand really why is it okay to do this experiment on animals.
Okay. What I understood His Holiness said was, I thought he was very careful about it. He said, in general, we should avoid it. But if there is a case where you can you minimize the killing to as little as possible, if you know that you benefit a lot of human beings, then it might be permissible. His Holiness was very careful. He said a few times, he said, we should, in general, of course, never for fun or anything harm a sentient being, a living being. But in the case of, let's take, His Holiness didn't talk about corona, but he said it like, if there is an illness, if there is a situation when a lot of humans may suffer, then in order to benefit a large number of human beings, and of course implied in that is also that human beings can, and that also includes those who have a precious human birth, can actually benefit others, then in that case, if it's unavoidable, then it's permissible in that case. So this is how I understood. I thought His Holiness was really, really careful with it, but he then, after having said all that, he then said, well, nonetheless, we should not use them for sports. We should not go lightly about it, etc. So it should really be out of necessity. Okay, and another example that I'm always reminded of living in India, for instance, well, all these bacteria, for instance, that we kill when we take antibiotica, if we get sick, for instance, those are also living beings, sentient beings that we may kill in our body when we take certain medication to kill them off, to then, well, of course, are they sentient beings or not? Could be debatable, but definitely we sometimes take medication, strong medication that may kill off certain organisms where we survive, but the living beings don't. So a similar scenario, or where we may have to kill in cases where rats cause a lot of disease, and then rats are being so in that case, for instance, with the rats, it would be like humans survive or rats survive. You know, like in that case, what would you do? So in both cases, if we can avoid killing, that would be best. However, in terms of especially the human, the precious human birth, that is part of the human, I mean, we're part of the human family, those who have a precious human rebirth. And so since they can do a lot in the Dharma, implied by that, I understood, It's also saving them. But it's also has also said on other occasions, if someone is really vicious and when a person is really horrible, they don't need to have a long life. It's actually better for them not to. They're actually, if they have a long life and they continue killing, etc., well, you know, it's not that they don't benefit from that long life. So I think implied, like as I said, Hans was so careful about it, is also, of course, benefiting a lot of human beings, especially those who can do a lot of positive actions and benefit others. Leora, does that help a little?
A little.
A little, yeah. But I think
still a question, but yeah, it helped a little.
Yeah. So
no, but thank you for clarifying this, Geshe,
Yeah.
because also when I watched this today, I thought that the English translation was a little bit direct, and I thought that there was more there than has been said, and that was a little bit like, okay, yeah. So thank you for the question, and thank you for clarifying this.
Yes, yes. So Holness, I mean, the point, I mean, Holness did talk really, really fast. So there was just no time to translate all that. But as Holness did say, I mean, only if it means you can benefit a lot of humans. And then if you can avoid it, of course, best. But otherwise, yeah, to be careful about it. So he was really, really, it's very difficult. But to say, don't kill a single animal at all, ever, that would be another extreme. And I think to avoid that extreme, Holness said very carefully what I just said. Yeah.
So it's true that in the English it wasn't as clear as you said now. It wasn't.
No, not to me, not to me. But of course, everyone is a subjective situation. I subjectively heard that, but of course it depends. Everyone heard something maybe slightly differently. This is how I understood it. And I got the sense as Holness tried to be really careful about it, but he talked so fast. So I don't know how much, I translated it into German. I don't know how much came across from what I just said. And of course that was true in other languages too.
May I add something?
So last question, yes, please.
Not necessarily a question, but I just want to add something and specify what you just talked about. I'm sorry, I don't have a camera.
Okay.
Well, you said only if it's necessary, and you said something about extreme not killing. Now, I want to add that as long as we're trying to be aware and minimize our suffering to the world, we have to think about karmic imprints. Just like, okay, so I'm not gonna eat chicken, so I'm not gonna, karmically encourage the killing of that animal. But if I eat an egg, that is the same industry. So if I eat egg and dairy, that is also karmically directly. Totally directly encouraging the industry to kill. So as far as I'm concerned, as looking at the entire karmic print, it should not only involve being vegetarian, it should be completely going vegan. And it's not extreme to my opinion, because the amount of harm the animal industry is causing is extremely, I can't even think about how is it extreme not killing. So it's
I agree with you. I agree with you. Sorry to cut you short. I mean, I agree with you. And as part of being in samsara, means, of course, there's certain actions. I mean, even if we eat vegetables, we do encourage the usage of certain, I don't know, pesticides and so forth. But I agree, we can avoid one, but we have to eat something. And if we can adopt such a lifestyle of being vegan, then great. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Last. When you said and explained everything about killing, the way you conduct your thoughts about it, all of a sudden the phenomena killing just went into pieces in my mind and sort of took out all the bad things out of killing. So as if I can walk to somebody who is just killed and be full of compassion because the killing is empty of its inherent existence. But in the same time, you know that killing is something which is negative. How do you combine these two? Because I really was, killing was like a flower.
Okay. Okay, but Varda, you just said suddenly, all of a sudden, you can walk up to the killer and have compassion. I don't think that's a problem to have compassion for the killer as well as for the victim. But compassion doesn't mean this person doesn't need to be disciplined. But of course, compassion in that this person has just created a lot of suffering for him or herself, of course. But compassion is just an inner state of mind. That doesn't mean we need to use, we shouldn't use harsh means to help that person to refrain from that in the future and so forth. But what I'm trying to say is that killing in and of itself is neither virtuous or non-virtuous. It is only in relation to what it causes, right? All I'm saying is that killing, I'm not saying killing is not killing. I'm not saying killing is not non-virtuous, but it's conventionally non-virtuous or in relatively non-virtuous in relation to the suffering it causes. And let's say in a crazy world where everything was upside down, if people love to be killed, if being killed was the most blissful experience, I guess we could say that killing is not necessarily negative, right? If killing, if this upside down world, right? If everyone loved to be killed and it would cause so much happiness.
But not only this, if you try to be in equanimity between love and hate,
Yes.
aversion and attachment, actually you are striving to take the air out of the balloon, sort of. Everything is empty, and then killing is not something which
is intrinsically horrible and can give to hatred. Well, yeah, great. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't lead to this hatred, etc. All right. So last thing, I'm really stopping here now. I'm sorry, we're a little bit over time, but we still do the meditation. If I give instructions to stop medications for an irreversible terminal condition, is that considered suicide? As for practicing Buddhist. I mean, I don't know if I don't know. This is so difficult. I mean, it may be just better for that person to not continue. It may be better for that person. It may not be better for that person. Who is to say? So, but out of your, if you make it informed information as a physician, and you know the suffering is just going to be a lot worse and their state of mind will be negative and they won't die peacefully, which is so important. If you can kind of not 100%, but can be certain about it, I think that's okay. You're actually doing them a favor. And the virtue, and even if, look, if there's like 99% of virtue and there's 1% of non-virtue, you still do it. All right. So there's famous story, I only need to say that much, I think, where the Buddha actually killed someone knowing he could stop this other person from engaging in a horrific murder, like a serial killer, basically, who was about to murder 499 people. He killed this person knowing he couldn't stop this person, the Buddha as a bodhisattva in a previous life before he was the Buddha, killing those 499 people in order to protect this person from killing and to protect the 499 people from being killed. He killed that person. All right. So, but knowing for certain, I mean, that he had this wisdom in that moment, and so therefore this act was special. Okay, but in general, this is dangerous. It's not saying assassinate someone because we don't know what the future is going to bring. We're always wiser in retrospect, but this just gives us a sense that there can be a lot of virtue in it, and it's not black and white. Okay. All right, but this discussion can go on for days. I know from past classes, this can go on for days. All right, but in general, benefit as many people as possible as you can, as many sentient beings as you can, and also in terms of short-term happiness and long-term happiness, to bring long-term happiness if at all possible. But even the Buddha will not always be able to bring only make a decision where no one suffers in that moment, but it will still be for the long-term benefit, definitely be the most effective. And unless we're a Buddha, we won't be able to make a perfect decision. Okay, so also to be patient with ourselves, even though we try to engage in the practice of virtue, it will not be the perfect, the best, unless we become a Buddha. That's why, again, of course, we work towards becoming a Buddha. Okay, great. Sorry if I didn't answer all your questions. We have, let's take 10 minutes. I apologize for those who hope to do longer meditation, but discussion is also important. All right, so let's take a few minutes, as usual, to just focus on breathing. And then we do a short analytical meditation on ethical conduct. Now, when it comes to ethical discipline, to refrain from engaging in any kind of harmful action, which means refraining from actions that are motivated by anger or attachment. There are two reasons to do so. The first reason is ourself, and the other reason is others. Regarding ourselves, the most basic wish we have is to be happy and not to suffer. And due to the law of nature, that any volitional action leads to a particular experience, it should make sense that I refrain from harmful actions in order not to experience unwanted suffering. So even if I'm motivated by selfishness, I should be wisely selfish, as His Holiness says. If I don't want to die prematurely, I should refrain from killing. If I don't want to lose my possessions, I mustn't steal. And if I want others to trust me, I should not lie to others, motivated by attachment or aversion. But even more important than my own welfare, my well-being, is the well-being of all sentient beings. And sentient beings are just like myself in that they don't want to suffer and instead want to be happy and satisfied. Especially if I want to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings. Sentient beings' happiness is my main concern, my main interest. And so I shall give my very best to refrain from directly harming others, and indirectly do the same. And so to conclude this meditation, let's generate the determination for our own sake, but more importantly, for the sake of all sentient beings, to refrain from engaging in the 10 non-virtues and other harmful actions. And together with bodhicitta, to make this our main practice for this week. And then, of course, to make sure that whatever virtue we've accumulated studying Chandrakirti's text, to dedicate that virtue, to make sure it doesn't get destroyed by hatred and anger, and dedicate it towards our own enlightenment. May this become one of the causes, one of the countless causes for us to purify our mind and to attain the fully enlightened state of a Buddha. For the welfare of all sentient beings. And now with this motivation, let's recite the prayer. Shantideva's prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the hopeless find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all the medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and the people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, so that's it for today. Sorry, I'm a little bit, 10 minutes over time, but most important, much more important than reading this text, much more important than this class, of course, is that you put into practice what you've learned today. So very practically, generate bodhicitta. Don't forget, bring it into your own personal life, especially when things are hard, but also pay a special attention to ethical discipline as part of this homework. And of course, if you can remember emptiness to make your practice especially pure, well, that'd be best. All right, so have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. All right.
Thank
Bye.
you so much,
Good
Geshe.
night. Thank you very much.
You're
Thank you so much,
welcome.
Keshima.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Bye.
night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll meet again here next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Tadashi.
Bye bye. Thank you.
תודה.
תודה רבה.
Yeah.